Today, we're going to unravel one of the most complicated and frankly volatile relationships in modern history, the one between Saddam Hussein and the United States. It's an incredible story of secret deals, shifting alliances, and an absolutely spectacular, violent fallout.
Picture this. It's pitch black in Adar, Iraq. U.S. soldiers have a remote farmhouse surrounded. They're closing in on a tiny, underground hideout, what they called a spider hole. And inside, a disheveled man, once the most powerful and feared figure in the entire country, is about to be captured.
And that is the question, isn't it? How did Saddam Hussein go from being a guy quietly supported by the CIA to becoming America's public enemy #1? To really get that, you have to go all the way back to the beginning.
Yeah, long before he was a dictator, Saddam was just a young, ambitious revolutionary looking for his shot at power. And in the middle of the Cold War, his path was about to cross, believe it or not, with the United States.
Saddam's rise was incredibly fast and incredibly violent. He joins the Ba'ath Party in '57. Just a couple of years later, he's part of a botched assassination attempt on Iraq's new prime minister, Qasem. Now, the hit failed, but it totally put Saddam on the map. He had to flee into exile, but here's the twist. It also put him directly onto the CIA's radar. So, you might be asking, why would the U.S. even care about some failed assassin? Well, because Prime Minister Qasem was getting way too friendly with the Soviet Union. He was signing deals, putting communists in his cabinet, and for Washington, in the thick of the Cold War, a Soviet-friendly Iraq with all that oil, that was an absolute nightmare scenario. And look, this isn't some conspiracy theory. It's on the record, confirmed by American officials like Ambassador Eichen. The CIA saw Saddam's fiercely anti-communist Ba'ath Party as the perfect tool to counter the Soviets. They just needed a partner on the inside. Declassified documents really show just how deep this all went. While Saddam was in exile in Egypt, the CIA was literally paying his bills. And then, it gets even darker. When the Ba'ath Party finally took power in a 1963 coup, the CIA reportedly handed them kill lists, names of communists and opponents to be eliminated. This new partnership, well, it was basically sealed in blood. So with the Baathists in control, Saddam just keeps climbing the ladder. By the late 70s, he's the undisputed strongman of Iraq. And pretty soon, the U.S. was about to find a brand new, and even more important, use for it. Okay, get this. Just 6 days after becoming president, Saddam calls an emergency meeting of all the top party leaders. He gets up on stage and claims he's uncovered a massive conspiracy against him, and that the traitors were right there in that room.
And he televised the whole thing. A terrified-looking party official, who had clearly been coerced, is forced to get up and read a confession. And one by one, he starts naming his own colleagues in the audience as traitors.
And as each name was called out, armed guards would just grab the guy and drag him out of the hall. It's pure terror. 68 high-ranking members were taken away. The rest of the room, you can imagine, started frantically shouting their loyalty to Saddam. But what happened next? I mean, it was a masterclass in psychological terror. Saddam forced the remaining loyal members to form the firing squads and execute their own comrades. Just think about that. He made sure everyone's hands were dirty, binding them all to him through this one horrific act. From that moment on, he had absolute, unquestionable control. Right as Saddam is cementing his power, a new threat pops up for the U.S., the Iranian Revolution. Suddenly, Washington sees Saddam not as a brutal dictator, but as a strategic wall against Iran. The difference in how the U.S. treated him is just night and day. During the Iran-Iraq War, the U.S. gave him billions in loans, satellite intelligence, helicopters. They even blocked the UN from condemning him for using chemical weapons. He was their guy. But just a decade later, Operation Desert Storm, sanctions, a complete 180.
So what happened? What flipped the switch? It all came down to one single, catastrophic miscalculation by Saddam: his invasion of Kuwait.
See, that 8-year war with Iran left Iraq totally broke. He owed Kuwait alone $14 billion. So Saddam accused them of stealing Iraqi oil and demanded they forgive the debt. When they said no, he saw a chance to fix all of his problems in one go: wipe out the debt, grab Kuwait's huge oil fields, and get a real coastline on the Persian Gulf. So on August 2nd, 1990, the tanks rolled. For the United States, that was a red line you just don't cross. The asset had become an adversary, literally overnight. The Gulf War kicked Saddam out of Kuwait, but left him in power. And that set the stage for a dozen years of conflict, sanctions, and inspections, all leading up to the 2003 invasion. After the invasion, Saddam just
vanished. U.S. forces were hunting for him for months. The big breakthrough came when they changed tactics. Instead of just going after the bigwigs, they started mapping Saddam's entire social network: family, friends, bodyguards. That led them to a family, the al-Muslits, who were his key helpers. Once they captured one of the brothers, he finally gave up the location.
And that brings us right back to where we started, that farmhouse in Ad-Dor. Soldiers found a rug on the ground, pulled it back, and saw a styrofoam plug sealing a hole. As they pried it open, they heard a voice coming from inside.
I am Saddam Hussein, president of Iraq, and I am willing to negotiate. Can you believe that? Even at the very, very end, hiding in a hole in the ground, he still thought he was in a position to negotiate. It was his last and biggest miscalculation.
Of course, his capture wasn't the end of the story, but it was the end of his rule. What came next was a trial that would force not just Iraq, but the whole world to reckon with his legacy.
You know, for all of his crimes, gassing his own people, invading his neighbors, the irony is what he was ultimately executed for: the Dujal massacre in 1982. The final verdict wasn't for an act of war against another country, but for an atrocity against his own citizens.
And after he was gone, the economic landscape of Iraq changed completely. See, one of the first things Saddam did back in the 70s was nationalize Iraq's oil. He kicked out all the foreign companies. Well, after the invasion, those massive contracts to develop Iraq's oil fields went to companies like BP, Shell, and ExxonMobil. The official reason we were given for the 2003 invasion was weapons of mass destruction, right? Weapons that were never found. But you have people like Alan Greenspan, the former head of the U.S. Central Bank, who just said it plainly: the Iraq War is largely about oil.
And that's what we're left with. It's an unavoidable question. The journey from covert asset to public enemy was long and twisted. But in the end, after all the justifications, was that final, violent break really about a fear of phantom weapons? Or was it about regaining control over one of the most valuable resources on the planet: